I am here. We are live. This is Jake Lee Green. No relation to myself, though we both have the moniker Lee in our name. Jake is somebody I know from covering protests and actions out in the field, and Jake's here to just kind of chat with me. One thing I'm having a hard time doing now. Obviously, Antifa is in the news because Donald Trump declared Antifa, which is, of course, a movement, a uh, non organized movement that does have smaller groups that are localized, but not a top down organization by any means. That's been declared a terrorist enterprise. I have a hard time describing to my friends what Antifa is, or they're just, kind of having fun making fun of the whole idea that Antifa is actually a thing at all. How do you describe what is Antifa anyway?
Well, in a loose set of terms, it's just anti-fascist. It's an anti-fascist ideology. It does have its roots, at least in terms of organization. It is definitely a decentralized group or groups of anti-fascists who kind of under the banner of anti-fascism will group together to sort of rally against or oppose causes which they deemed to be fascist causes. So, in Europe, anti-fascist action, which was again also very much decentralized, kind of grouped together all these different anti-fascist individuals who would gather together under this banner to oppose, Nazi rallies, different government austerity measures, free trade measures, World Bank, G8 summits, things like that, and would implement certain tactics in order to oppose those rallies and their conventions.
Now, I'm curious if you see this the way I do, in the sense that there are two things going on at once. And often it's called the three-way fight, the anti fascist three-way fight. And I keep telling people, look, just Google the anti fascist three-way fight. You'll find out what's going on, because it accurately describes that this is a movement. It's decentralized. It's hard for journalists, not just law enforcement, but for journalists to kind of put their finger on and talk about. And if you think back to 2000, there was that big action. Actually, I talked to John Zerzan, who is a anarchist in Eugene, and he told me, he was like, "Yeah, that was us. We came up from Eugene. It was during the World Trade Organization coming to Seattle, and it was supposed to be a big deal of Seattle being launched on the world stage, and on a lot of protests. And then on, I think it was day 3, all of a sudden the Starbucks are getting their windows bashed out. So the three-way fight, it's not just organizing to oppose whoever's deemed the fascists. It's action against the establishment, the liberal establishment, even, or the state.
Neoliberal,
Neoliberal.
neoliberalism, yeah, and I would say that I'm familiar with Zerzan's work. He's kind of been a figurehead in the anarchist scene, at least green anarchy, environmental rights issues such as that for quite a bit of time. But I would say that farther back than 1999, the actual implementation of NAFTA and the free trade area of the Americas was really a big start to this anti-globalization movement, which also, that definitely emboldens a lot of left wing organizations and individuals to rally against it. And not just them, but also right wing organizations as well. I mean, the Teamsters, which has historically kind of been like a right wing conservative group of people, not so much so now. Walked hand in hand with anti-fascist, anarchists, socialists during the 1999 Seattle and following like free trade area of the Americas summits. They walked hand in hand against some of the policies that were deemed death sentences to these, Rust Belt sort of industries and working class industries that a lot of these people engaged in. But I'd say going farther back to the 99, I would say that a great example of an anti-fascist movement that kind of rose up against neoliberalism specifically was the Zapatistas, which is the EZLN. I mean, in 1994, as soon as Bill Clinton had signed the NAFTA free trade pacts, I mean that indigenous army rose up overnight. And I wouldn't say overnight. Obviously, there was organization leading up to that, but their announcement of opposition to neoliberal policies affecting the Americas, as well as the world through IMF Bank, etc., World Bank, sorry, they they declared it in '94 on January 1st.
Now, I often hear liberals getting conflated with neoliberals, and it sounds to me like you're talking about something very specific pre-Trump that was going on. And I would venture and would be interested to define how that has changed with the advent of Trump. In other words, what radical action became as of 2017 UC Berkeley from the video, because I wasn't there. I was down here in LA in 2017, and so although I was following it, it was very hard to follow what was going down at UC Berkeley in 2017. But it seemed to me that at the inauguration in 2017, and even when Trump was elected at the end of 2016, you had something different in the radical leftist movement that was specifically trained on Trump himself and labeling him and anybody who had a red hat as fascist.
Right, and that certainly is true to form, at least in my experience too. I was in Northern California during that time, not specifically the Bay Area, but you had like radical organizations, right-wing radical organizations such as BANA, which is Bay Area National Anarchists. They're right-wing neo-Nazi
I
anarchists.
heard about that.
And they were big proponents of Trump and MAGA, and they had some organizing going on where they were like loosely affiliated with other white supremacist groups, and then not so white supremacist groups, which were just like conservative groups, local GOP organizations, and so there was a little bit of a sort of a momentum building on the right wing that I think the left wing definitely took notice of. And given it is Berkeley, so there's a large, on the left at least, there's a large contingent of students, that are comprising a youth, led movement that are comprising some of the more radical elements, but also like kind of breathing in new life to, the left organizations in that area. I mean, on the left, you had, in these opposing groups, you had like the Bay Area RevCom, which has always been active in that area. They are not very favored by other left wing
Right,
groups,
right.
but
They're their own thing, it seems, because I've seen so many incidents where the RevCom, which is the Revolutionary Communist Party, Avakian or whatever, Bob Avakian,
Bob
yeah,
Avakian's party.
is yeah. I've seen so many different situations where people are kicking them out or against them, which is just it's funny because there is this leftist on leftist kind of disagreements.
Yeah, but to specifically like kind of answer the point that you're trying to make, there was a momentum on the right that I think kind of and the left heard a call to oppose that, because not only was it like more radical white supremacist groups like BANA that were organizing under Trump, to try to like gain momentum for votes for Trump, but you also had the formation of the Proud Boys, which was kind of coming out of this like Central Valley area, and like they were coming up to these like Bay Area rallies and sort of dipping their toe in to some of these rallies, and like the Central Valley in itself has got a very unique group of eclectic group of Proud Boys that span everywhere from like radical white supremacist ideologies to like your white nationalists to your kind of conservative, they have like a spectrum of like their organizations affiliations. But I think the left saw that and definitely felt that was a threat, at least to, you
But
know,
but
in,
but
yeah,
wait a second, because Milo Yiannopoulos at Berkeley and Milo Yiannopoulos in Seattle, it was his tour that kicked off January of 2017. that predates the Proud Boys. And this is where we kind of get into this discussion of what is a active agent in all of this and what is a reactive one. And correct me if I'm wrong, because people are like, oh, you're being an apologist for the Proud Boys. I'm like, no, no, no. I'm just trying to explain. I mean, the Proud Boys were definitely active in J6. The Oath Keepers were definitely active. But what's interesting about both those groups is in 2017, if you go back to UC Berkeley, they were actually reactive in that situation. And during the fourth rally, I believe, at UC Berkeley, the Oath Keepers and other these other groups were there kind of on this security detail, and there wasn't a riot on the very last UC Berkeley demonstration. So that's what I'm kind of interested in is what is the source of all of this? What's the active element in your mind? Is it Trump? Is it anti-fascists? Is it right-wing groups? What do you, because I think you and I probably see this differently. What do you think is the active, I guess I want to say, factor in all of this that
Um,
keeps exacerbating polarization and extremism in the country?
well, aside, this is going to be a long answer. Well, aside from there being the obvious elements of like social media being like, harboring, the algorithm is definitely pushing ideologies to certain demographics of people who are interested in certain things. That is not unknown. There's definitely like, I mean, if I'm answering this question correctly, I think in response to Trump's campaign, there was a large group of that which people call themselves anti-fascists, believing that his term would usher in certain policies that would threaten progress that has been made, specifically in reproductive rights, LGBTQI policies that protect, you know, people in all facets of society, including the military. I think it also threatened women's rights, reproductive rights, as I mentioned already. Um, I think that reactive state was anti-fascist, seeing what was potentially a threat based on what Trump was himself saying that he was going to implement, more so this term than last term. But certainly, I think also his base, the left, I believe, took sort of like an observation of what his base was. And a lot of his support was coming from white supremacists, neo Nazis, and that
So,
there was a demographic of that.
but
Uh,
that's the question that I don't have an answer for, which is, of course there were these fringe groups, but were they the definition of what MAGA was? And did the media concentrate? In other words, what came first, the fascist or the anti-fascist? That's what I'm trying to figure out in this situation. I was listening to Christopher Matthias, who I call him one of the Huffington Post three. These are three guys who I've kind of crossed paths with somewhat adversarially, in the sense that I see things different because I'm not afraid to be very, very critical of anti-fascists, where all three of them have a positioning which is pretty, it gives a lot of excuses for the excesses that might come out of the militant left, because it's focused on what they consider to be the worse of the two, the more present, clear and present danger, which you keep hearing it could happen here. Chris Mateus, even in April, had a article in MSNBC where he's saying it is happening here. That's of course an allusion to fascism and what is it, Sinclair Lewis, the novel. It can't happen here, so it can happen here is kind of this statement that you hear over and over. And I have a fundamental sort of, I'm not sure that those anti-fascist actions haven't exacerbated the situation. And I point back to 2017, where Trump said he was ready to make a DACA deal, and Schumer and Pelosi were pressured to remove the $25 billion of funding for the wall for the DACA deal. They pulled that back. The DACA deal never happened. And instead, now, fast forward to today, Trump has almost twice as much, over $45 billion for his wall and personal ICE force and he doesn't need to make a deal with the Democrats. And I think that in itself is a failure of of starting out with the bad faith answer that we're starting out in 2017 with we are at fascism as of January the 17th or whatever it was, uh, and in response to that you get a lack of flexibility and where we arrive of where we are now, and there's a certain helplessness I feel like, because everything that's being done in the resistance movement has already been done in 2017 and 2020, and it feels to me like the activists have lost a little bit of their clout by playing their cards and defining Trump as fascist early on, and getting us all aboard with those fears, and now we're living in that, and I don't know.
Well,
I
just
that
to be clear, I mean, are you saying that you feel like that it couldn't happen here is happening now, and that the
it's
fears?
happening. It's
Yeah,
happening more. It's a little bit of what do you call it? Predeterminate, uh, predeterministic. The idea, in other words, I think we are closer. When you get Trump sending the military into states, when you get situations like that, I think we are closer to what many people feared, was that there'd be more authoritarian,
right. And I
influence in our lives.
right, and I guess that's where I guess I disagree just slightly, because no, I do agree that yeah, we're definitely experiencing a level of authoritarianism that is unprecedented in any presidency within the last few terms. This is definitely an escalation of what I think anti-fascists have been stating for quite a bit of time. Is that Trump was going to go after DACA. Trump was going to go after legally naturalized citizens, green card holders, people going the legal route, quote unquote. I mean, he escalated all that. And, back in 2017, 2018, 2019, when Richard Spencer was a larger sort of mouthpiece for like support for Trump, he was openly, seek howling with support for that kind of behavior for white
Right,
nationalists. So,
right.
Antifa, anti-fascists, seeing that, I think, the fears were definitely valid, and I think that if you're looking for a chicken or the egg sort of argument about which came first, well, the fascists have always organized within the United States. Never been a secret. Ku Klux Klan back in the 30s was marching on the Capitol in D.C. So this is not unheard of in the United States.
Well, so then you have to ask this: what do you do once you've won? And are there moments over the last 10 years where the activist left has won? And I would say yes. When you have Charlottesville, when you have the Unite the Right rally, which ends in the death of Heather Heyer, and you have a situation where there is universal condemnation for what people saw in Charlottesville. Now there's a little more to that though, because there is a chain of escalation. The anti-fascists were not just sitting there with their hands behind their back in
Certainly,
Charlotte.
certainly.
And so that's the closest you can get to a win, where you have public and media support, even though you kind of had a hand in it. In other words, if you're an anti-fascist, you were out there throwing things. And sometimes people that were getting things thrown at them were the quote unquote fine people who showed up to support the Robert E. Lee, the,
I'm
the
gonna
Rob,
need you to stop.
No, I'm gonna need you to please, like,
I'm gonna need you
oh,
to exit the room. Can you please exit the room, please? I'm sorry, you just let my dog out. I need you to exit the room.
all right. I'll just do some filler time here while my man takes care of business. I'll talk about some other things in the news. Chicago and Portland, both. If you want to see what's going on there, as I said, go to BG on the scene. He was in Portland. I'm going to mute the action over here and see what's going on there. Okay, Jake is back. So I should have muted a little earlier. Uh, uh, are you good, or you need a little time?
I'm not sure what the deal is. She just came into my private room and she's continuing to harass me from the other side.
Uh, um, so what I was saying is that if people want to check into stuff going on, Scooter Caster, BG on the scene. These are two people we know from being around and shooting video across the country. If you want to check in, I know they've been in Chicago and Portland. I'm curious how you view how things have kind of played out currently in the last couple of couple of months, in the sense that it almost seems like we're in this holding pattern or loop of going back in.
If nobody wants to hear this man speak, I'm going into a conference call.
Okay, we got a little bit of a. Do you want to regroup at another time?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's also something that I would like to reiterate is that definitely check out News to Share, the Scootercaster, freedomnews.tv. That's Brendan Gutenswaga, who does BG on the scene. All very amazing. I mean, check out my stuff. It's aonphoto.com. I've got bylines photo credits with some of the majors. The Intercept video work has been shown, New York Times. Several. I'm sorry.
Nice. No, no.
Activism Uncensored, a project of Racket News by Matt Taibbi. Um, all this is really important, I feel like. And keep your finger to the pulse, people, for those who are like watching, because I mean, this is like a daily occurrence where things are moving so quickly that it's not unheard of that one escalation will lead to another. And I feel like we got to be really, as people who do view nonviolent activism as a means of achieving certain goals. I think it's more important now for us to stay vigilant of what gets produced in major media, because right now the major media it moves quicker than we can even be able to disseminate the information. So that's why we called out all those other journalists who are like on the front lines, because their work tends to not be just 30-second snippets with like a byline. It tends to be a more rounded and better defined sort of like visual explanation via raw imagery. And so that's why I think us as citizens, we've got a lot more in common than we got a lot more in common than we tend to give credit for. A lot of us, at the end of the day, we want to be able to provide for ourselves. We want, basic needs met. We want our communities to thrive. We have certain goals that we're looking to achieve. And I think if we were to overcome sort of like any specific issue, I think it would be to become anti-fascist. I mean, if I'm going to promote that, I think anti-fascism as an ideology is incredibly important now more than ever, and that goes for both sides, right wing and left wing activism.
Well, I think both agree that we do want to be anti-authoritarian, but the problem is that people become at times authoritarian with their anti-authoritarian positions, and they become so uh, entrenched in defining people that are different or see things different or even speak differently in terms of what is acceptable speech and what isn't, that you start labeling people uh, by what you would consider to be fascist or adversarial. And the problem is that once you strip all those labels away and yes, get to the heart of what people are interested in, how they want their lives to change, and they want to be free from any authoritarian role. I found that Proud Boys and BLM, once they really like sat down, I did one podcast from two folks in Utah that were friends, and they could agree at least on 6 or 7 points of what they wanted and how they wanted to empower the working class and how they wanted to get rid of Citizens United and all this big money in our elections and the war on drugs and get rid of. There was so much that they could agree on when it came to actual policy. It's just it was the identity stuff that was completely eroding the conversation.
Well, I certainly do agree that identity politics was a key sort of hostility between the left and the right, particularly the Proud Boys and anti-fascists. Proud Boys had been out of colors organizing for a whole myriad of different reasons, including, anti-LGBTQ policies in school boards or school districts. The anti-vaccine debate was huge in 2021 following J6. There was multiple Proud Boys who were out of colors that were involved in organizing, not just nationwide, but between you and me. I mean, we saw it firsthand in Los Angeles. I think but they were also grouping together a lot of other ideologies within them.
Well, but at the heart of that, the anti-mandate stuff, that's what was so strange to me, was seeing the quote unquote anti-fascists oppose the anti-mandate protests. That's what made no sense to me at all. So you're going to go attack, and I documented two incidents. We were both on the ground on August the 14th of 2021 when it was SoCal Antifa showing up to oppose the patriot movement MAGA types that were all in this coalition against medical mandates. And that's what didn't make sense to me. If you're anti-authoritarian and you're anti-government and you're an anarchist, how are you pro mandate for vaccinations and pharma? That was confusing. And then I saw the exact same thing happen again in the state of Washington less than a month later. I ended up on the ground in Olympia that day that the anti-fascists organized to oppose the right-wingers, who were a bunch of Proud Boys and such that were at the Washington state capitol. And that was the day then that it's not self-defense anymore. If somebody comes to oppose your rally and then you chase them half a mile across town, which is exactly what the Proud Boys did, led by Tiny Toezi. They chased the anti-fascists, and that was the day that he ended up shot in the ankle and lying on the pavement. And I shot that video there. But that was always a conundrum to me. How are you anti-fascist and anarchist, and you're opposing the people that are rallying against the medical mandate?
Well, I can't. I can't speak for these movements because, particularly, as a journalist, like
Right.
my specific opinion about it is kind of it.
I,
It's
I,
not
I'm
really.
not asking you to speak to them, but I am challenging you to be as loud as I am.
I do, however, must say that I know that there was personal grief, like personal resentments between specific people in the both of those movements, and there was a
Right.
lot of following. People were following each other around. I mean, there was
Yeah.
activists that had come up from Southern California to Portland and also to Olympia. I mean,
True.
these had been starting to foment personal resentments that I could definitely see playing out in these like larger like rallies. I mean, for the anti-vaccination stuff, you had the Proud Boys going to Harlow in West Hollywood, and they were doing that week after week after
Well,
week.
I don't know if that was Proud Boys. That was more
Proud Boys were present. I know that it wasn't specifically a Proud
yeah, I
Boys
mean
thing, but
that
you
was
had
not the
Adam
thrust
Kiefer,
of
you had
right.
Southern California
Yeah, but
Proud Boys
I
chapters.
don't know if I saw him at Harlow. So Harlow is interesting because I used to like sing karaoke there, and I knew that place and I knew the manager, but I went to that two or three times, and the people there were a lot of actors. Actually, there were a lot of like out of work actors, because what happened here is the mandate structure was such that if you didn't get vaccinated, you weren't going to be allowed to work in Hollywood. So I actually did get vaccinated, and then I worked on the set of I played a cop on the set of All Rise, which was this judicial. I think it was on Oprah's network for a while, but I just did like
Congratulations.
I just like yeah I just was like, it was the pandemic, work was sparse. I was like, I'll go do this role and play a sheriff or what. I only had like 5 lines, but the whole thing was I couldn't. It was like masking procedures. It was all of this stuff. I had to show my vaccination in order to get that to book that job. So interestingly enough, at Harlow, I would say it was a majority out of work actors and types like that were protesting.
Well, I do. I mean, I would disagree with that statement. I mean, being it Hollywood and all,
Yeah,
but you
yeah,
definitely had like reoccurring characters like Shiva Bagari, who was a
right.
big like anti-vaccination mandate activist who was leading like Beverly Hills rallies, and whom I personally, and this is a personal opinion, came across as quite unhinged. Now, this was in
Very strident. Yeah.
yeah,
But
and
here's the thing: you're allowed to be. What you're saying on the left? I mean, people rather strident at times on the left? It's
well,
like,
I'm not denying that, but I'm also not trying to play like this well because sort of game, you know, like or like what is it, the what about ism?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm definitely like making a specific example, but no, undoubtedly, I think on both sides there's you know radical elements that you just cannot converse with because their position is so staunch and also dare I say. Unhinged. There's really little wiggle room to kind of understand why you would target certain businesses, certain people,
I
or
see.
certain ideologies, and so
And so it becomes
Shiva
a
Bagari just
local.
being one of them.
It became a local beef, and that's
Yeah.
why you were at the Cedar Sinai, right?
Oh yeah.
That was very much a local beef because that was after we Spa won, and it was interesting because SoCal Antifa actually tweeted, and I remember seeing it, and they had tweeted their account has been obliterated now in the Musk era of X, but when it was Twitter, they of course tweeted the We Spa actions and or counteractions, I should say, because it's the right wingers that are showing up to protest in that situation, and it's them that are coming to shut down the fascists and whatnot. I mean, that's the thing that city hall event that we both, their literature said no safe space for fascists, and the day ends up with a MAGA guy lying, stabbed, bleeding from the heart, had with a laceration to the heart on the pavement. So I'm
Yeah, and
critical of
also
that.
not to play into the whataboutism thing, but
Yeah,
I think it's important to mention that Benjamin Patino, who started that whole
started that. Yeah,
that thing, you know, he you know attacked me. He attacked multiple people. He also engaged other people, encouraged
yeah.
other people
No,
to cross
he
the street from their rally in order to engage that very small
his
group of
his
anti-vaxxers.
position was if they showed up, if Antifa was going to show up, he was going to go fight them, and so he started that by going over, drawing them over, and yeah, sometimes it just takes one person. I mean, the other thing is just let the anti-mandate people protest. The thing that's interesting though is that you could point to is that it was more radical in Portland because before January 6th, you have two protests before January 6th at the Salem, Oregon State Capitol that get out of control. One of them in December and one, I believe, on January the 1st. And Proud Boys and others actually do storm the Oregon State Capitol to protest
Yeah, I
medical
remember that.
mandates. And that's very much a precursor to what January 6th was, is those Pacific Northwest Proud Boys kind of laid the groundwork by becoming active rather than reactive. Because all the times that I had seen them before, the Proud Boys were reactive until you get to Portland in December of 20 amidst their stop the steal and their grievance and their anti-mandate frustration. There are two stormings of the Oregon state capitol before January 6th. So all
With
of this stuff,
Salem being a battleground that I remember pretty vividly. You know, and
yeah.
I hate to cut you off there because you know I would actually love to continue this conversation. There's a lot that I wanted to add to that.
Next week,
But
we'll chat more.
yeah, I'm actually so for people who are viewing this, I meant to do this on my laptop, which is on a charger, but due to technical difficulties, I had to do it on my phone, which is not on a charger. So
Gotcha.
I'm losing power right now. If anybody's wondering why I'm taking off, it's not for lack
It's
of.
good. I'm playing Brutus in a production of Julius Caesar, and I have tons of lines to memorize, and so I've got to go. I've got to go myself, and and work on that. So let's reconvene next week.
All right, yeah, definitely. I've got
It's
a little
fun.
bit more information about some of the experiences that I've had documenting Proud Boys in particular, the right wing versus left wing militancy in Los Angeles, as well as in Modesto, which is something that you mentioned before. Yeah, I if I think you got a plug there. Go see him in Brutus. Come see my stuff. Aeonphoto.com. That's AEONPHOTO.com. I'm kind of on hiatus right now, but which is a bad decision considering there's so much going on right now.
Lot
But
going on, Jake.
yeah,
Lot going on, Jake, and the audience is on your side. They say that you were not at fault in whatever dust up you we just witnessed. So the viewers are on your side. I'm gonna if you go, I'm just gonna address this comment. I guess it
all
says there's
right.
no. So
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your
all
time.
right,
Thank you so much.
take care.
Yeah, sure.
All right, this comment from a viewer said, "Oh gosh, I can't even." It doesn't let me see it once I click it, so I have to like strain. There's no way around it. Once I can't see. One side has gone too far the other side in order to counter steps too far in the other direction. For a centrist, the fight to maintain any sense of, I gotta pull this back so I can see it again, of reason turns into a heroic task because you now have two more or less irrational enemies rather than one. The center cannot hold. It does feel like that. It does feel like it's really hard to hold the center because you're the one that gets attacked on either side of these far edges that are really gaining momentum and controlling the conversation. Even this week, Joy Reid posted, I posted on my Facebook, Jeremy Reporter. If you're not watching on Facebook, that's where a lot of the discussion has been about the events of the last 2 months, which really stepped up once when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I started posting more, talking about what's going on and leveling criticism about the rhetoric on what I consider to be my side, because I consider myself center left. But it's true, it's hard to hold the center because the loudest voices are amplified online, and then everybody gets sucked into their kind of MO of just trolling whoever has anything to say that doesn't support what they have to say. So we're getting pulled to these extremes, and we're losing a lot of the plot, and nobody really knows what happened. Nobody knows what's happened since 2020, and that's why I didn't want to become a writer and write a book. I really didn't. I wanted to just go to theater and stuff, but because this story became so interesting, and because I was constantly attacked since 2020 for trying to parse how some very radical positions have pulled, I think, those in the center, pulled away from those in the center and isolated us to a point where we can't even have conversations about this without getting just, dogpiled. Uh, that made me want to do this more. That's why I want to keep talking to people like Jake, who you just saw, a good buddy who I met when we were out shooting. He comes from an organizing, a leftist organizer background, so he knows a lot more than I do, and has more attachment, I think, culturally to anti-fascism in its ideal sense of wanting to be against authoritarianism and against what is potentially fascism. But the question that I keep bringing up is, once you decide your political adversaries are fascist in 2015, are you actually exacerbating the situation and not allowing for any kind of movement or discussion? And because we're not talking, does that make things kind of more and more fraught? Does it make our political situation more and more fraught? So those are the questions. I'm going to keep talking to my pals on mostly on Tuesday and Thursday, And that comment was from X, from Donna. Thank you for that comment. And anybody else, who wants to weigh in, maybe we'll get some more. There was a time, it's interesting. There was a time where we used to have, small conversation of, 100 viewers, 200 viewers watching, and I'd answer questions. And so if you ever want to weigh in with even just a hello, please do. And I'm happy to take your questions. And we'll continue to talk about what's going on in this genre of media. And in my case, I see media as unable to parse what's going on the ground, and just not having the tools to actually talk about what's going on in the sense of militancy in activist scenes. So I'm open to answer questions on the right, the left. I'm feel free to criticize both or inquire about both. I'll probably be back on Thursday or next Thursdays around 4 p.m. Pacific. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.